I
No,
could
look at
just
that.
ask one or two questions about the for the Bruges Group um, relating to reform and your own views. And the first one, just to throw it in there, is do you think reform is going to break the mold of British politics?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I am
And
absolutely certain of
that's it,
it.
right? Okay.
Yeah. So, and I mean, the reason I say that is most people are guided by past precedent. They take their lead from historical events, which nine times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100 would be the sensible way to forecast the future. But I've never known anything like the current environment. We have a situation where we've had 14 years of conservative government. You would expect the economy to be in reasonable shape. You'd expect the people perhaps to be bored, but understanding of the good governance that a conservative government typically would bring over 14 years. You know, when Margaret Thatcher left, okay, we had a few issues, but we all understood she'd run the country pretty well. She'd broken the back of the unions. She'd instilled meritocracy. She'd replaced dependency with aspiration. She left the country in a much better place as a country. And we are now, after 14 years of conservative government, massive government debt, massive taxation, GDP per capita shrinking has done for the last 7 or 8 quarters, immigration out of control, our, our nation state threatened, our language under attack, our culture under attack, our history being rewritten in front of our very eyes to diminish the terrific contribution made by the United Kingdom to the world. All of these things having taken place under a conservative government. And the prospect is a Labour government. And we all know in our heart of hearts, the vast majority of the British people who are small c conservative, that the Labour Party will be a disaster. And it's not that Keir Starmer is popular. It's that the Tory party is so unpopular because of the massive damage they've done. And people are waking up and they're recognizing that Reform UK is a party that puts the United Kingdom first and puts its people first and makes policy hanging off that fundamental bedrock. And that hasn't happened under the Labour or Conservative governments for the last 25 years, hasn't happened under the Conservative government, as I mentioned, and won't happen under a future Labour government. So the challenge for Reform UK is not to replace the Conservative Party, frankly, as the voice of conservatism. It's to get the Conservative vote out, the small c Conservative vote, which, by the way, includes a lot of Labour voters, get the small c Conservative voter out. And I think all we need to do is more of what we're doing at the moment, and so that our public recognition continues to grow, and we will get the votes. You look at where we were in October 2023, polling 5%. We're now polling 15% in 6 months, Frank. That is unheard of. We're 4 points behind the Conservative Party in the latest YouGov poll. It's not inconceivable that we will overtake them in the polls. And that could be a dam breaking moment. So, past precedent is a good yardstick in normal times. We are living in very abnormal times. And the country has been misgoverned for 25 years, 14 of which have been under a conservative government. And the people are desperately looking for a political party, an ideology that will reverse this massive damage done, over that period of time.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, is it that the Conservative government has failed, or under several leaderships has failed, or is it they just haven't delivered, or have they essentially had to deal with so many different sort of crises over that period of
No,
time that yeah.
no, I don't accept that excuse. I know they trotted out that we had COVID, we had Brexit, we had all this stuff. That's absolute garbage. If they couldn't have coped with all of that in their stride, they're not worthy of being in office. Uh, Brexit was not the imposition that the Conservative government made it out to be. They treated it like a necessary evil, and that's where they went wrong with it. It was a huge opportunity to reset the United Kingdom. to jettison 40 years of creeping European Union bureaucracy, to reinstill, first and foremost, British common law, get rid of this notion that we're all guilty until proven innocent, which is, hugely damaging the Pollyannic approach to life, which is, infested all our institutions. Get rid of DEI, cut back immigration, champion the British private sector. They have done none of it. Instead of being, I would have been so energized with a blank piece of paper that Brexit would have given me had I been in office. I would have rewritten the whole socio-economic model for the United Kingdom. And I would have taken it to a place where, as Reform UK seeks to put the British people first, to put the United Kingdom first, to have strong borders, to have a deregulated economy, promoting those areas of our economy which are strong, having a low corporation tax rate so that we can attract international capital to the UK. They could have done all of this and they turned their back on it. None of it's rocket science. It's all pretty obvious stuff, but they're just not that way minded. The Conservative and Unionist Party, but we haven't talked about the constitutional damage they've done. The Conservative Party is not conservative, and that's the problem.
Would you say that the fundamental problem with them was that they were trying to copy Tony Blair in order to get into power, and then failed because of that?
Absolutely right. The heir to Blair was Cameron, and Cameron molded himself on Tony Blair. And instead of reversing the foundations of the damage that Tony Blair's policies laid, he went and built on those foundations, and he delivered Tony Blair's vision in spades. And Theresa May went on to do the same, and Boris Johnson added to it. DEI, which is a particular bugbear of mine, diversity, equality, and inclusion, which I think is so damaging to the social, cultural, and economic fabric of this country. DEI was accelerated under Boris Johnson. It's taken on whole new meaning in the last 3 years, and Boris Johnson was the Brexit Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed. So, do you think also that they also had, but they had constraints rather, from various supranationals and the United States and what have you, that has prevented a lot of what could have happened or what they intended to do?
Well, they buy into the supranational institutions. The current load of Western leaders, Biden, Trudeau, Johnson, now Sunak in particular, Macron, Scholz, Angela Merkel before him, they buy in to all these institutions. They love the EU, they love the UN, they love the WHO, the World Bank, the IMF. They tread on eggshells in fear of upsetting any of these institutions, and they will take the knee to these institutions if necessary, at the expense of the British people. And that's what's been going on. So when you say they've had pressure brought to bear on them, I don't think it's so much the pressure that these supranational institutions have brought, but the love affair that our governing class has with them and their reluctance to break with them. And as I say, to do what's right for the country.
Yes. So, I mean,
it's also damning about our democracy, because the more power our governing class is handed over to all these unelected bodies, both internationally and, by the way, domestically, all the quangos that have been set up, the regulatory bodies, the FCA, ELCOM, Ofcom, all these regulatory bodies, the Financial Reporting Council, through which DEI has been driven through the financial services industries, actuaries, accountants, and so on. All of these bodies dumb down our democracy because they're all run by people who are unaccountable, who don't answer to the politicians, who don't answer to the people. So they've damaged our democracy terribly by the promotion of all, this kind of approach to governance.
Thank you. So what do you say to the people who argue that a strong support for reform could just split the conservative or overall conservative vote and just end up none of the policies that you want to implement will ever be implemented because you have a Labour government who will move further towards Europe?
Well, first of all, there's no such thing as a conservative vote. there are people and they have their votes and they cast them as they see fit. We present a 180-degree turn away from the direction of travel being pursued both by the Conservative government and the Labour government. They're basically a uni-party. We don't say that glibly, we say that with meaning, that whatever the Conservative Party does, the Labour Party will also do. Starmer's whole approach to campaigning at the moment, as we would have seen, is simply, I won't do anything bad. I'll go on doing whatever the Tories are doing. You can trust me not to change too much. That's his approach. And we know that the Conservative Party's policies have damaged the country terribly. So there is no such thing as the Conservative vote. There's no such thing as splitting the Conservative vote, because even if people voted for the Conservative Party, they wouldn't get conservatism. They wouldn't get that which I regard as putting the United Kingdom first and its people first. They won't get it. So we have to present ourselves not as a pressure group for the Conservative Party, not as a weather vane for them or some kind of social conscience. We are a genuine choice for the people of this country. And yes, it may take 1 or 2 electoral cycles to really establish ourselves. But my goodness, haven't we done a fantastic job in the last 3 years? We were polling 1% 3 years ago. The Tories were at 35%. We're polling 15, the Tories are at 19. That is the direction of travel. Soon, we may argue, though it would be a philosophically unsound argument to make, that they're splitting our vote.
Interesting. What do you think about people who, let's say, in red wall seats? You're talking about Labour voters, former Labour voters, who would have supported in the old days, would have supported someone like sort of Peter Shaw or Hugh Gaitskell or even Tony Benn or what have you, in overall Labour policies, but on the issue of the EU, were very much Brexiteers, if you like, and also have voted in the red wall seats because of massive migration, what have you. And but your policies may look far too centre right to them.
Well, I would beg to differ. Our policies are, as I said, to put the British people first, and the vast bulk of the British people are the working and middle classes. And our policies are aimed at promoting the working and middle classes. Labour Party, by the way, doesn't represent the working people of the United Kingdom anymore. It's much more interested in immigration, immigrants, supranational institutions, the liberal elite intellectual view of how the country should be run, or indeed how the country should cease to exist, because I think that's the direction that they're taking us in. The typical historical Labour voter, if they read our policies, would vote for us. We're going to raise the minimum threshold at which income tax is paid from £12,500 per annum to £20,000 per annum. That mainly helps the working class. We're going to raise the threshold at which 40% tax is levied from £50,000 to £70,000. Remember, when the 40% tax rate was introduced by Nigel Lawson in 1988, it was introduced at a wage level of £40,000 per annum. It's now only at 50. It kicks in at 50. The vast majority of the middle class are paying the higher rate of tax. So we have to increase that threshold, promoting, therefore, the working and middle class. Our other major policy is ditching net zero, which is another tax on the working and middle class. ULEZ, congestion charge, green taxes on our fuel bills, VAT on our fuel bills, all of these taxes which are levied on the British people, including requiring us, for example, to make sure all our houses are upgraded to energy performance C ratings by 2027, and then to EPC B ratings by 2030, installing heat exchangers and throwing away our perfectly good gas boilers. All of this is a massive cost burden on the working middle class, and we're going to ditch all of that. So we will liberate the working and middle classes. That's what Reform UK is going to do. We are going to promote their interests. So yes, the mainstream media and other commentators may wish to paint us as centre-right. By the way, I don't really know what the hell is centre-right. I don't know what is right-wing anymore. Actually, when you look at what we're doing, a lot of it is traditional Labour policy.
Okay, I was going to say that a well, if I was going to say centre-right Conservative MP, might look at your policies and look at and think it's like one of their shopping lists essentially. But
Yeah.
what can it be implemented given the
Yes,
massive national debt we have?
it can, absolutely. So the first thing to note, Frank, is that they hijack the debate when they say you've got to have funded tax cuts. They haven't funded any other form of expenditure. National debt, when this Conservative government took over, was about 900 billion pounds. It's now 2.1, 2.2 trillion. National debt's gone through the roof. Now, if everything was fully funded in this sanctimonious way that they describe everything should be, our national debt wouldn't have gone up, would it? It's gone up, it's gone through the roof. When they have a policy they want to spend money on, there's no shortage of cash. It's only when people propose tax cuts that suddenly Jeremy Hunt and his predecessors become incredibly mean with the purse strings. They don't want the British people to keep that which is legitimately theirs and that they earned. So that's the first thing to debunk. But even if we're going to give in to the narrative of needing funded tax cuts, if you ditch net zero, you save somewhere between, Richard Tice has it at 30 billion pounds per annum. I actually estimate the saving to be more like 60 or 70 billion pounds per annum just by ditching net zero. Burden on the exchequer reduces by 60 to 70 billion in my estimation, based on treasury figures that I've seen. Our Bank of England at the moment, this is a slightly technical subject, but when the Bank of England bought all that government debt from the banks, do you remember, to save the banks? When all that money was printed, the deposits on that money, which sit with the Bank of England, are earning interest, high rates of interest for the banks. The Bank of England is paying the commercial banking sector about 30 or 40 billion pounds a year going out of government coffers. No other country that's practiced quantitative easing, that has bought government bonds, the central bank has bought government bonds in the way that ours has, pays the commercial banks an interest rate. So between ditching net zero and doing what other central banks have done, i.e. not pay interest on the deposits that were created by the purchase of government debt, we would save something like 100 to 150 billion altogether, together with some other savings that we're making. So we can fully fund the tax cuts that we advocate. And that's the fallacy with the Conservatives. Because they've adopted such borrow, tax and spend policies, they're finding it difficult to justify what they call funded tax cuts because they've blown the cash on ridiculous policies such as net zero. They need to get out of the straitjacket of the illiberal policies that they've been hijacked by. That's what they need to do.
Thank you. And do you think? Yes. I mean that a reform government might move, given the dangerous world in which we live, we might move towards a better relationship or a sort of expanded Commonwealth or better relationship with the global South, for example.
Well, when our big policy is domestic policy because it's all about the United Kingdom and it's all about the British people. And domestically, one of our most important policies, not biggest, one of our most important policies is to increase defense spending. Two words which really offend me when they put together are the two words peace dividend, which have come together in the last 30 years to deprive successive administrations of the political will to fund adequately our armed forces. And if you want the world to be at peace, you have to prepare for war. It's a very old adage. It's true. Grant Shapps is now saying we're in a pre-war phase. Well, you're either in one or two phases as a country. You're either at war, you're not, or you're about to go to war. Those are the two states in which all countries exist. And when you're not at war, you should be preparing for it. And it's an absolute travesty that they've hollowed out our armed forces. So we increased spending on defense from 2% to 2.5%, and then on to 3% as soon as we're able after that. And I completely, by the way, I'm slightly digressing, but I completely support Donald Trump when he says Europe isn't pulling its weight as far as NATO is concerned. The US is spending over 3.5% of its GDP on defense. We spend around 2%, and then Germany is taking the mickey. It's the biggest economy in Europe, and it's not pulling its own weight. So we've got to take a much more positive, robust, domestic approach to our defence. And but on the back of that, just answering your point, of course we should trade with former Commonwealth countries. We are culturally so similar. We have historic roots. And it's a great shame that over the last 30, 40 years, we've turned our back on the Commonwealth as we've become more Eurocentric. And we've lost influence in very important parts of the world, such as India, Pakistan, Australia. You know, all these countries, we should have been nurturing trade agreements. We should have been nurturing trade. And we've turned our backs on all of that in the pursuit of the sclerotic, self-obsessed, I mean, I can't think of the adjectives required in order to denigrate adequately the European Union. But that is, you know, we pursued the EU rather than pursuing what is British. And we need to go back to that.
Thank you. Going back to defence, do you think that the adage, the other adage of talking softly and carrying a big stick applies, and the talking part of that should be very, very important, rather than sort of just waving the stick?
I completely agree. And how embarrassing it was the other day when we discovered that China had hacked 40 million details of 40 million British people, for David Cameron to turn around and make that big speech about how we will protect our democracy. There is no steps that we're not prepared to take to, challenge China, blah, 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 blah. And then we impose sanctions on 2 people. I mean, the Chinese must. So you're absolutely right. We should carry a big stick and speak very softly.
Thank you. And regarding the Reform Party, if given whatever result the election brings, would the Reform Party, in your opinion, be prepared to enter into a coalition, and if so, with whom?
Well, I mean, we certainly wouldn't enter into a coalition with the Labour Party or SNP or the completely lunatic Liberal Democrats. I mean, they're all lunatics as far as I'm concerned, frankly, Frank. The Labour Party, Liberal Democrats and SNP are just completely balmy. There are sane elements in the Conservative Party. Now, what's going to be very interesting about this election is to see which element of the Conservative Party survives it. You know, there is the One Nation lot, who I think are as bad as the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats. And then you have the ERG and a number of other families. And I wish they'd ditch all these families and just, make it clear for those of us who don't have time to, delve into the nth detail of how Conservative internal workings operate, that, they're effectively the sensible part of the party. Now, it just depends on who, as you go through this election, which of those 2 constituencies is in the ascendancy. One of the reasons I think the Conservative Party has been unable to be conservative is because they've allowed the One Nation lot to control the party. That's the problem. And they need to be, there's some fantastic work been done by Lord Cruddas and David Campbell Bannerman, the Conservative Democratic Organization, which was basically an attempt to try and root out the Labour mindset from the Conservative Party, get rid of this One Nation lot and to take it out of the CCHQ. But whether or not we would be in a position to enter into some kind of arrangement with a Conservative Party really depends on what their policies are and, which of their people survive an election. We wouldn't begin to share governance with Tobias Ellwood, for example. I mean, he's the antithesis of everything we stand for.
Thank you. And so what about standing, the decision whether or not to stand in constituencies where the sitting MP is, in your opinion, sort of favours the same sort of policies? I mean, would you support the Reform standing in those constituencies?
Absolutely. We are an alternative to the Conservative Party. We're not a pressure group. To stand down against people whom we respect and like, such as, for example, Suella Braverman and Priti Patel. I think David Jones is retiring, but we respect him. Jacob Rees-Mogg and so on. To stand down against them would be to send a signal, which would be a wrong signal to send, and it's not one we wish to send and not one which we believe in, that we're just a pressure group. We're not. we are a different political party. We offer a completely different vision. And my criticism of Suella, Pretty, Jacob, and others is that whilst you talk the talk, and Suella in particular talks very bravely and admirably, she is walking with a broken, corrupted Conservative Party, and she needs to leave the party. Her ideology isn't of the Conservative Party. If she genuinely feels the things she says, she should find it difficult, unconscionable indeed, to remain in the Conservative Party. She should leave. And, we'd be happy to have a drink and chat it over with her.
Thank you. Okay, to round it off, I would like you to just deliver whatever sort of give your message.
So so my message is the United Kingdom is genuinely facing an existential threat at multiple levels: economic, cultural, political, and constitutional. We haven't talked about the Irish Sea border, but we're facing challenges on every single front. We are in peril. And the policies of the Conservative Party, which got us into this difficulty, are the same policies they wish to go on trotting out. And the Labour Party is probably the Conservative Party squared. We need a 180-degree handbrake turn in the way this country is being governed. And the only party that offers it is Reform UK. We will reduce immigration. We will champion British workers. We'll reduce the burden of tax. We'll reduce the burden of regulation. And we will ditch net zero. We will champion the private enterprise. We will replace dependency with aspiration. And we will start creating wealth for the United Kingdom again. If people want change, they have to vote for it. And the only real change is Reform UK.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Just one last thing is how do you see the Bruges Group developing and sort of and its role? Do you say?
You tell me, Frank. You tell me. I've always been
like
slightly.
It to be?
Well, I've looked at you slightly. I've never really fully understood the Bruges Group because, I think you're meant to be conservative, but you too had hitched your wagon, if you don't mind me speaking frankly, since you've asked the question, seemingly to me, to the Conservative Party. There's not much of a gap between you. And I think as the Conservative Party ceased to be conservative, I would have hoped the Bruges Group to become less linked to it. It's a bit like the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail should be a conservative, small c conservative newspaper, but they're fully hitched to the Conservative Party. And I think people really need to wake up and smell the coffee and realize it's not the Conservative Party we believed it was.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Ben.
Thank you.